Hello, my creative friends, and welcome to another episode of The Daily Prompt. In this series, we are giving you a daily action prompt every single day to give you some inspiration, to give you something specific to think about, to inspire you, so that you actually take action and follow through on whatever your goals or your dreams are. In this case, I'm guiding you through the process of writing screenplays, building stories, turning your imagination into something that an audience would love to consume, because in part I'm a big believer that we all have stories to tell. Every one of us has a unique imagination because each one of us has a different window on our world, and so we have stories inside us that only we can tell. So if we don't tell those stories, then I believe that the world misses out on possibly a really unique insight that can help someone else make sense of the world or move forward in whatever their journey is. I really think we're all interconnected in much the same way that everything in your story is interconnected. So I really think it's important to that everyone tell their story. So what we're doing right now in this series is we're in the middle of reverse engineering the process. If you're new here, you haven't watched these videos before, in episode number 4, I gave sort of an overview of the complete creative process, finding an idea, turning it into a story, getting that story on the page, refining it, turning it into something extraordinary, connecting with the producer. That process in overview. And then over the past, and we're about in the middle, each episode I'm digging into each of the phases of that process. In overview, again, we're not yet into some of the detail of it and the how-tos and all that kind of stuff. We need context first. Also, in case you're new around here, I've had this little cough. It fires up when I start talking, so it's not as bad as it seems. I duck out the audio because I don't want you just to focus on the cough. But my apologies. I know even that's a little bit distracting. We'll get to the end of it at some point soon. For now, where we are in the process at this point is if we reverse engineer the process, we start at the end, we figure out what's the ultimate goal. It's connecting with that producer or someone who's going to say yes to your project and turn it into a screenplay. That's the first episode. Then in order to actually do that, we need to make sure that our work is aligned with their immediate needs. So how do we align things? Well, we get notes and feedback, and we interpret notes and feedback. Notes and feedback are not instructional. I'm going to make a whole video about this. Notes and feedback are to help you understand how your project lands. It doesn't matter where the feedback comes from necessarily. There's obviously different levels of quality of feedback, but feedback itself is for you to understand how your work's landing. It's not for you to be trained by the person giving the feedback. I'll talk more about that in an upcoming video. But getting feedback and understanding that. Now, in order to get good feedback, you're going to want to send out the best possible work. So if you can send out work that is extraordinary, that's a page turner, that really grabs people and pulls them in, people are going to be more enthusiastic about giving you feedback. And the better quality the work you send out, the better quality of feedback people will be able to give you, because they're not going to have to focus on the little obvious things like, you got lots of spelling problems in here. Okay, good. But what about my story? So if everything is polished and fine and like pulls them right in, well, then they're not going to be focused on the minutia. They're going to be focused on the story. They're going to be focused on the depth of the meaning of the story. And, well, this choice made me think that this character wanted this kind of thing. They're going to be focused on the things that really matter. So you need to make sure that your work's a page turner. Now, before you can make sure your work's a page turner, you have to make sure your story is solid. Because there's no point trying to refine something, turning it into a page turner if the underlying story isn't working. So that's what the previous episode was about, which is the rewrite process. How do we go from whatever draft you currently have to a solid draft, something that really is exactly what you want to say, is the story you want to tell, tells it in the way that you want to tell it, and is then ready for polishing and turning that into an experience for the reader. So in order to get to the point where you can rewrite in the first place, we need to get it on the page. So working backwards, we get to what I call the apply phase. The phase, the reason I call it the apply phase is because I call the story development phase, which we'll talk about in the next video, that I call the focus phase, where you focus your ideas into a story. Once you focus them into a story, you apply that story to the page. So it's the writing phase. It's literally where you're sitting down and you're doing this. Now, a lot of writers like to leap right into that. They have an idea, they want to just sit down and do some like free writing exercise, which is absolutely fine. I'm a big fan of it. I strongly advocate it. But if you're going to approach the process of writing and creating systematically, if you're going to approach the process with a creative framework, you don't want to just jump into that part of it. Because if you just jump into that part of it, what happens is ideas spark ideas in your brain. It's the way our brains work. You have an idea, you see something in the world, it sparks an idea, that leads to another idea, that leads to another idea, and another idea, and so on and so on. So when you sit down to start writing, you have this idea, you sit down to start writing, well, one idea is going to lead to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. But it's going to happen in that moment. So what can often happen, what happens probably 90% of the time, is as you're writing, a new idea pops into your head, which you then follow, and before you know it, you've veered way off track to what your original plan was. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about how we can sort of plan what we do so that you don't go off the rails. But in this video, the actual writing of it, that's what you want to have happen. So you want to make sure that you have a framework in place. You know the story that you're going to tell when you sit down to actually start blasting the words onto the page. Now, I've discovered, figured out, worked out, decided there's about 7 different approaches that you can use to it. You can either think things through and really sort of focus on going scene by scene as you write through your project, or you can just go to a certain page count and just blast through. I'm a big fan of really just blasting through. If you've done the work that we're going to talk about in the next video, the story development work before you sit down to start writing, if you've actually done that work, then you can actually leave all that stuff in the back of your creative subconscious and you can sit down and just start blasting words onto the page. Because if you do, your brain is going to keep you on track. Your brain is going to keep you in target of where you're trying to go by nature of the fact that you've worked out your story before you got here. So what you really want to do at this point is tap into the power of your creative subconscious. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I'm a sort of a pop science aficionado. I like reading about this stuff. I like learning about this stuff. One of the things that I'm most fascinated about is neuroscience and sort of the way the brain works, and the white matter and the gray matter and the how all that stuff works. And the fact that if you do something over and over, you're building synaptic connections that have this myelin sheath that forms that enables those connections to happen faster, which is how things become intuitive for us. All this kind of stuff. I don't want to go too far down the road, but one of the things that has become quite clear in relatively recent years is the fact that pretty much the 99+% of all of your brain activity is happening in your subconscious. It's not what you're consciously aware of. We have, right now you're listening to me, hopefully, you're paying attention, you're focused on me. Your conscious focus is on what I'm saying right now. Now, that thing that you're seeing the world through when you go, hey, look, it's a brown door, like that's your conscious focus. That is the tiniest pinpoint fraction of what's happening in your brain activity. The vast majority of what's happening in your brain activity is happening in your creative subconscious. It's happening in the background. You're not aware of it consciously. It's how you breathe. It's how your heart beats. It's how when you drive down the street and you go, geez, I don't even remember driving the past 2 miles. It's because your brain is functioning and leaving your conscious focus to be on whatever you're thinking, whatever you're daydreaming about at that moment. So when you create, I don't know if you've ever walked down the street and just randomly out of nowhere into your brain pops this brilliant idea and you think, where did that come from? I wasn't looking at anything. I wasn't thinking about anything, but this great idea just popped into my head. Now, you know, we can attribute that to the muse or to the spirit or whatever we want, but ultimately what's happening is in your creative subconscious, things are happening, things are firing, and it comes up with a good idea and it sends it to your conscious focus. We can tap into that with writing in a very powerful way. We tap into that by letting go, by taking our conscious focus off of what we're actually writing and kind of like free writing, just seeing where it takes us. Now, again, rather than straying off the mark because we're just letting it take us where it takes us, which by the way is a good writing exercise in general, but to actually make sure that we're creating the story that we wanted to tell, we need to put the scaffolding in place. We need to establish the story framework, which we'll talk about in the next video. But for now, the point to understand is that when you sit down to actually write, you should not, my advice, you can do what you want, but my suggestion, don't reread what you've written as you're writing it. Blast it out onto the page and keep moving forward. Because if you have planned effectively, what you really do is you tap into that magic source, that creative subconscious. What happens is our conscious brains, our focus, logics things out. Our conscious focus really tries to come up with the perfect idea, or tries to come up with the right solution, or tries to create something clever or interesting or what have you. Our creative subconscious is spitting out what we're really thinking and really feeling. Our creative subconscious is giving us the magic. It's giving us that X factor, that mystery sauce, right? That is going to make your work come to life. Now, yes, you can, once you get skilled at this stuff and there are techniques and whatever, you can design some of that, but it's always, I don't know why, but it tends to be, I don't want to say always, but it tends to be much more effective and powerful and impactful if it spontaneously comes out of you without that logic brain getting in the way. And the only way that really happens is if when you sit down to actually put the words on the page, if you let go. Now, that's really hard to do when you have in your mind this vision and this plan and this whole strategy, and I want this to achieve that. How do you then let go of that? But if you do, particularly with a story plan, as we'll talk about next, if you really can let go and just let the words onto the page, what you're going to find along the way is that your brain will give you the solutions. Your brain will give you the answers. At first, if this is all new to you, if you're brand new to writing, this is probably not the place to start, but certainly it's a great exercise to try regardless. But you're going to have to develop this skill. You're going to have to learn to trust that I can pour stuff onto the page. I always say it's important to write garbage. I use an expletive normally, but for a general audience here, it's important to write garbage because the act of writing garbage is what's going to help you see what's in the creative subconscious, and then you can extract that in the strengthen phase, in the rewrite process. You can take that, it can show you what you're trying to say, and you can shape that then into the story that you want it to be. So it's important to understand how this process is being reverse engineered so that we understand how to actually do each of the phases of this process. So ultimately, I am a big believer that the apply phase, the actual physical writing phase, the more you write, the better you get at, the more intuitive this becomes for you, the faster you're going to want to do this, because the more you get to the point where you have more knowledge, you have more skill, you have more experience in your brain, in your experience, in your life, in your creative subconscious, the more it's going to intuitively, naturally be able to spit out ideas that are effective. And whatever's not effective, you can always chuck it out. You can always go through the rewrite process and strip away anything that's totally garbage. So this is the beauty of writing, is that whatever you write, you can rewrite. So don't let anyone tell you, even in the comments, that they have to do this a bit more methodically and a bit more labor over the words. You do need to refine with a certain logic, with a certain carefulness, but the actual just tapping into the joy of what's inside you, That you want to do instinctively, intuitively, quickly, in my opinion. It's the stronger way to do it. Now, there's also the other way to do it, which is to very methodically think through what are the objectives of the next 3 scenes that I'm going to write today. And then going through and hitting those objectives, writing the scenes that you intended to write. That too will end up with a draft, which is close or far to your ultimate goal, which you then go through the rewrite process. So it's important, regardless of which approach you take or which variation of which approach you take, it's important to understand that in the writing phase, and what I call the apply phase, it's important at that point in the process to not judge your work, to not make decisions creatively about whether to keep or get rid of things. It's really important to get whatever idea is in your head that you've shaped into a story in the next video. It's really important to get that onto the page so that you can begin the rewrite process. There's that cliche, I don't know if did I mention it in the previous episode, all writing is rewriting. It is. So don't belabor the actual getting words on the page. So many, particularly new writers, think somehow that the act of typing is writing. No, that's typing. The act of writing is all of it. The act of writing is rewriting. The act of writing is story development. The act of writing is getting feedback and aligning that feedback to your audience, to what the audience's expectations are, to surprise and delight them through your story. So don't think about, when you sit down to write, try if you can to strip away all judgment, to strip away any need for perfection, any even need for good. If you do what we talk about in the next video, which is the story development phase of it, if you really do that and then you do this, then you're going to end up with a pretty decent story at the end of it if you trust yourself. It's not going to be perfect. You're still going to have to refine, but you'll get much further along if you can let go, tap into your creative subconscious, let those words pour out on the page, and see where the magic takes you. Sometimes as you're writing, even with the best story plan in mind, sometimes as you're writing, what you're writing sparks a whole new insight into your project. You go, oh my God, I need to reshape my project for this new thing that I just discovered spontaneously. That's part of how your brain works. Ideas spark ideas. It happens in your creative subconscious. So you don't have to, but ideally, my advice is to let that come out of you because it's in there. And the only way to do that is to let go and have fun with it. So bringing this back to a daily prompt today, simple exercise. It's an exercise that I have talked about in the, if you haven't seen on this video, on this channel, the Writer's Block Instant Cure. Same basic thing. What I want you to do today is basically get out a piece of paper or open up your computer, wherever you write, set a little timer and click start and start writing for 3 minutes. Do not stop. Do not pause. Do not judge. Do not reread. Do not think. Just as many words as you possibly can, as fast as you possibly can. Train of thought. Idea sparks idea sparks idea. If it's that wall is white, that wall is white. That makes me feel stupid because the wall is white and that's obvious to everyone who sees the wall. And why am I writing about a white wall? And just see where it goes over the course of 3 minutes. And then what you'll find at the end of the 3 minutes, if you really let yourself go and just see where the exercise takes you, you may end up with something interesting that you've written. You can share it in the comments if you want to. You don't have to. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But ultimately, if you can tap into that, just the core of that, you're going to find that you're able to. That thing is going to dramatically help your writing process throughout, not just for this writing phase, but that exercise will help you in many, many ways. We can talk about it in a future episode as well, but that's the daily prompt for today. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to comment. If you haven't already subscribed, click the little subscribe button, click the little bell notification next to it so that you get notified when new episodes come out. But spoiler alert, they come out at 6 a.m. Los Angeles time every day. So hopefully we will see you tomorrow.